Right.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. So I'm here with Helena Mattsson on the occasion of the of publishing your book, Architecture and Retrenchment, appeared in paperback recently.
Yeah.
So that's so. Thank you for joining us for this conversation about your book. Architecture and Retrenchment, Neoliberalization of the Swedish Model Across Aesthetics and Space, 1968 to 1994. And this is a book that investigates architecture's role in the neoliberalization of the welfare state, but more importantly, I would argue it tries to redefine the relationship between architecture and society. And it builds on a series of case studies, and wedged in between them we find different themes that provide explanatory analysis of different phenomena that could help kind of explain the cases in my reading, like very simply put. But before we say anything else, I need to ask you to explain the term retrenchment in this context, because it's nothing that it's not a concept that you would expect to find in a book on architecture.
No, yeah, and that's also why I choose the concept. Yeah. So I play a bit with the notion of this concept retrenchment. So it both kind of draws on the meaning of it as something that is a loss, more or less, a withdrawal of the state, austerity, state retrenchment, you could say, but also the military use of the term. And then you could speak about some kind of defense structures coming up inside a fortification. So it's how architecture somehow reconstruct itself in a moment of transformation.
Right. And that also implies like an outside threat in a sense. So what is being defended and what's the outside threat? I don't know, is there any...
I mean, architecture during the welfare state period, especially in Sweden, but also in the whole of Europe, was very closely connected to the state, as we know, and also economically. So, of course, that's one very big, maybe not threat, but a big shift. So, how could the profession somehow, reconstruct itself and also use both aesthetics and spatial organization in this transformation? So, So that's some kind of, when you speak about defending or reconstructing, so it's a response to this transformation.
Right. And you discussed this shift or transformation through 5 different case studies, all set in Sweden and also in Stockholm. The collective house, the model, an exhibition at Moderna Museet, the suburb, which is Skärholmen suburbs out of Stockholm, the Globe, multi-purpose arena, and the postmodern housing area of Södra Station. And then there's also a renewal project included from Tensta. And they are chronologically distributed over the book. But more importantly, I think we have 4 different themed chapters wedged in between them. And what I find so intriguing about this book as an architectural historian is that you don't put different architectural phenomena, buildings, let's say, or urban projects next to a preconceived idea of an era and assume that they are interrelated just because they happen to be simultaneous in time. But what I understand that you do is that you actually show how, for example, concrete political and legal actions migrate into architecture and vice versa, how architecture affects society through different mechanisms. And I think these theme chapters, corporatism, human capital, the code, emancipation, they play a key role in this analysis. So I would really like if you could say something about them and their function in the book, and then also why these concepts instead of others.
Maybe I could start saying something about the sites. I look upon the sites as architectural projects, more like assemblages of material and non-material agents and objects and things and so. Kind of creating constellations, and it's through these constellations that transformation is happening. So each site in a way is kind of trying to investigate how architecture is relating to societal aspects as political transformations and economical shifts and so forth, and following different threads and objects and agents. So in this kind of tensions that you can find in each site, I do some kind of historical reading. And as you say, they are not kind of related chronologically or something, but they are more like, what could you say, moments in time where you go down, deep down, instead of looking, vertically somehow. Horizontally, yeah. Yeah, exactly. I'm looking vertically. Yeah. But the themes then, I see them as concepts and topics that you could cross. You could cross these sites, try to understand them in relation to each other through these themes. And then I have like two themes that are more related to kind of legally instigated infrastructures like corporatism and the code. And then I have human capital and emancipation, and those two more connects to some kind of mental transformation. But both, of course, or all four of them are, I see them as themes where you could understand this transformation that is taking place in the neoliberal shift, you could say. And I have really tried to use concepts outside the architectural kind of common discourse. So not like postmodernism and this kind of concept, trying to find new concepts, and that has also opened up some kind of new space for me in my thinking. And I was, in fact, I took this with me. This image, and I worked together with Carolina Eriksson on the cover of this book. And here you could see, like, I put this maybe there. You could see here in the middle you have like the caravan with a little window in the middle, and you could wonder if it could be, the laborers' home for when they work on this site, or it could be some kind of working what do you say? Hut or whatever. Shed or something. And then you have the concrete building element. That is some kind of postmodern version of this kind of serial building element, concrete. And here you have the concrete mixer, and you have some kind of storage space, and you see this is also put on.
It's like slightly better contrast, with that front.
And this is also indicating, that this is maybe moving somewhere, or it came from somewhere, but from where? And the whole site is, to me, a bit mysterious, and also kind of connects to some kind of military, structure, that you are kind of establishing some kind of new thing is going on here.
So mobilization.
Mobilization somehow. So, and it also speaks about architecture maybe in another sense than looking, at an object, architectural object. Here you kind of go behind the scene of the object. So in this sense, working with these themes and trying to think about the sites as sites of tensions and different agents and so forth, has also kind of redefined architecture for me as a concept. So I start to think about architecture not in terms of an object, but in terms of relationships. Also bringing in labor and materials and things like that.
And this kind of gritty reality or background story. But this specific element is this from Bofill Spåge? Okay. Because you mentioned, and like in a way that's one of the kind of crowning moments of Swedish postmodern architecture, if I may. But you mentioned postmodernism and postmodernism, because what you do in the book is that you somehow offer a reading of certain concepts and ideas of contemporary history of Swedish architecture, which goes a little bit counter to established narratives. I'm thinking of the concept of postmodernism. You avoid it like consistently in the book. Why is that?
As I said, I mean, I try to use other frameworks than the most common ones that architecture often is interpreted through. So, like corporatism and human capital and so forth. I mean, it's not like those concepts is not, used in architecture. Of course, they are, but I try to foreground them more. But I mean, yes. I'm avoiding postmodernism, but one of the chapters is also focusing on it.
That's true. But I think that's super relevant because it also it has to do with how we name things and kind of epistemological connection between concepts, words, and the understanding of the content of those words. And as you start kind of shaking around the interrelatedness between established words and concepts in a specific, for example, architectural environment, you create new meanings. So I think that's really and another of those like examples of when you go a little bit counter to established understandings of the course of events in Swedish architecture during this era or period is your reading of the relationship between the events surrounding 1968 and the neoliberal turn. Because you offer an interpretation which is a little bit, it goes a bit counter to what a common reading would be. So can
I just ask you what would the common reading be?
I'm not. I wouldn't. That somehow the activities and the criticism against modern architecture kind of somehow foregrounded or paved the way for the subsequent events in the beginning of the 80s and mid to late 80s. But you offer a slightly different perspective.
So I see. I mean, I look at this how ideas and the critique brought forward from the 1968, not only the 1968 movement, but late 60s maybe, and in the 70s also. I mean, the critique towards the welfare state and the need for more democratic process in architecture and so forth, participation and all these things that we know about. But I see more, or I'm interested in how these ideas and techniques and models brought forward by this, movement in the late 60s is reused by other forces, and I interpret it more as some kind of conservative response. And I think that's extremely important to see this, that many of the ideas that is used today in neoliberalization, especially it's very obvious when you look at participation, how it has been used in this kind of legitimizing processes of putting things on the individual instead of taking a common responsibility and so forth. That these models in fact maybe had totally different origin. So it's important to not forget that, but also to highlight them. So in some sense, just to say something about this, also I have been interested to look on how different models of how we built our world is kind of put against each other. you know, when you are supposed to build a city or plan a new housing area or even a smaller house or building, you need to have some kind of idea. What kind of life are you planning for? What kind of society are we thinking of? And often different proposals kind of hid the different ideologies, or you know, you have a world kind of built into these projects. And why did some of these models survive and others kind of were forgotten somehow in the history?
Are there any like eternal ideas about like ideas about architecture which are universally valid? Well, would be curious. But I'm just I'm thinking about I'm like vaguely familiar with the architectural debate in the late 60s and 70s, the public debate on architecture, but also as it was discussed in professional magazines, etc. And it very much revolves around the responsibility of the architect and his or her possibilities to fulfill or realize the idea of this society that was launched. And one dilemma is the impossibility of realizing an egalitarian welfare system within the framework of a capitalist financial system. And that's kind of brought to the fore in the 70s. So the architects were seen as scapegoats, executing whatever was assigned to them. So my question is, what is the role of the architect in this later transformation? What roles do they take on? What's their agency? And are they today, in any sense, held responsible for whatever happened?
I mean, first maybe I can say something about my interpretation anyway, thinking about the role of the architect in the 70s and also late 60s, you know, in the Million Program debate and so forth. As you said, they were often accused for being, you know, the reason for constructing these environments. And that's also one of the topics going into corporatism when I looked into that it reveals what I think, you know, very many other actors. So the architects often come up with other ideas, and what you see in the end that the architects were accused of is not maybe in their first schedules and schemes, and it's very much a pressure from the private sector. So what you think maybe is the state is maybe more the private company, the private agencies. However, but that was some kind of bracket one. But coming to the 80s and you know, the neoliberalization, more obvious period or so. I mean, the profession starts to engage much more in the market. You have totally new role. The Globe chapter or site.
Right, you have a fantastic image in your book.
Speaks a bit about that,
or is it?
I mean, a new way of presenting the projects, much more desirable models, drawings, colors, using aesthetics, you know. So it's much more playing on the desire of the customer or the clients and so forth.
I'm soon there. I'm looking for, here it is, I think.
It's very
this
small.
Is the one. It's very small. But this is very telling about the new
this
role.
one, they built a huge model when they presented the project, and they were standing inside the model, as you see there. So that's one role. Another role I would say is, you know, that they took on the role as being you know, part of a participatory project much more. So that's also a new role that was a bit maybe complex many times, because it was often kind of connected to the withdrawal of resources. So what you maybe start up ended in a very different result. And that's what the last chapter is about. And maybe another role could be the planner, that need to be more an organizer, because the process is so hard to to plan, and it's hard to have great visions when so many actors is involved. And that's also a very big shift, of course, in the 80s when you have the public and the private working together much more.
And another responsibility of the architect is the aesthetics, obviously.
Yeah.
And that's part of because the book is not very much about aesthetics at all. It's about political sciences, it's about economics, etc., etc. But it's still, and nevertheless, aesthetics is in the title of your book. So what is the background to that decision to put it on? Could you say something about the aesthetics?
Yeah, I think the aesthetics is extremely important during this period. It's one of the key concepts, in fact. And I would say that 2 chapters speaks about that. Maybe I haven't really brought it up, kind of up front, really. But both this about the postmodern housing area and also the globe chapter. We saw the architect standing in the model. And I mean, in the postmodern housing area, I would say that when regulation, it was deregulated somehow. The building code, they tested a new version of the building codes. But for the planners, aesthetics and postmodernism became a way of kind of controlling this area and controlling the planning process. So. And also, I mean, to create a new life, new postmodern subject and so forth, that was, totally someone else compared to the modernist subject.
Yeah.
So I think it's, it could have been even, brought to the front much more, because I think it's really, it's a crucial part in this transformation.
And because you also mentioned, I was, struck by this kind of insight when I read your words about the role of aesthetics and the role of architecture. I think it was in relationship to Södra Stationsområdet, that architecture kind of filled this function of dressing or visualizing an idea or a dream about architecture. It had to, in order to materialize the kind of financial reality, it had to have an image. You had to provide an image of what was possible with this new kind of planning mechanism or this new construct. And therefore, so
I can go on. I can take over. I mean, it's one very central moment there, the deregulation of the credit market.
Yeah,
and that we spoke about that the other day too. That you can. It's not enough to deregulate economy. You need to have something more to kind of enforce the private sector to start to borrow money, to invest things and so forth. And I think that both aesthetics and the architecture comes in there and has a crucial role to form this, desire for building up new worlds. So that's also a role of architecture, to embrace, economic investment.
Right. You mentioned this deregulation of the financial market in Sweden, which happened in 1985, right? So I was. Could you identify, after having worked with this material and this time for such a long time, and the book is the result of a long-term engagement, long-standing engagement with these questions throughout your research. Have you identified any individual cases or events, actions that have been especially influential, apart from the deregulation of the financial market? Is like any any individual project or specific building, an exhibition, a book, or can you that you can award with, was awarded some sort of agency?
I mean, of course, you could say that all different sites here are crucial moments. That's also why I choose them, and they also involve different objects, as you know. For example, this one that is part, you know, the Bofill's ark and the element there. But in a way, as I also said, that I look more upon relationships. So in that sense, maybe I haven't really focused on that.
So what is it like to study or perform research on this recent history, or the history of the contemporary, in a sense? Because you write a quite disturbing passage, I think, about the archival situation, because you say that this shift is particularly difficult to research because the neoliberal turn, I don't know what to call it, but let's use that, you know, phenomenon. It meant a considerable reorganization also of documentation, sometimes changing several times, and thus, you know, shuffling around, renaming archives, moving them around, and thus covering up the traces of its own transformation in a sense. So, you know, what are your methods? How do you go about to kind of extract information on this how do you make sense of it?
Thanks for this question. I think it's so crucial in a way. You know, especially when you work with suburbs or, you know, more, if you call it, vulnerable areas, and groups maybe that are not, you know, in power, or kind of their history has not been coined as sufficient important. So everyone has been a bit kind of, you know, sloppy to keep track of all memories and papers and things that has happened. So, and that became very obvious for us when we worked in the Stockholm suburb and went to the archives. It was so huge gap in the archives. We knew that it was materials, competitions, you know, things that you find in projects related to the inner city, but not in the suburbs. And then the explanation was that due to what you said, all these kind of reorganizations, new projects, they sell and buy new buildings, and so in the 80s and 90s, so many things has passed away, or they are destroyed anyway, or you can't trace them. So and it's very tricky how to work with these gaps. So one way for us was to I worked together with colleagues, Michael Schalk and Sara Brolund, and now the group is extended, but we work with a group called Action Archive. So we have tried to reconstruct or fill in gaps. So we have had witness seminars, workshops where we map things, we look at drawings, we have had walking tours and so forth. But so that's a way to try to kind of construct an archive where you can't find the archive. So, and I think that's really important, and it's a big question for historians today. I think if you want to work with the recent past, you need to have some kind of strategy here.
Yeah. Good. Let's do that. And that's a call for everyone. You know. But I'm just it's a common understanding that history always departs from the present. You know, the concerns and the urgencies of the present, they kind of guide you into the events of the past, and they also color your interpretation of the past. So I'm just very curious to hear, after so many years of research of the recent past of Swedish architecture, what does the future hold? You know, if we start from today and look forward, like with this, knowledge on processes and materials and actors and agencies, what is this? What is this? It constitutes a ground for something, but what is that, or what could that be? Would you argue?
Yeah. I can in fact say something about, this book draws on also a research project I had with Sven Olof Wallerstein, part of SITE, as we know, that was more looking into the Swedish model and Swedish modernism through some kind of idealization of the Swedish model, and we try to open that up and also kind of rethink a bit the Swedish historiography, architecture historiography, kind of bringing in other traces and relationships and so forth. But the focus was maybe to kind of work with this idealization. And this book is much more about where are we today. The Swedish model is so transformed, deviated, reconstructed. Can we think about the Swedish model and what is the welfare state and so forth? And maybe thinking about the future and welfare state research in architecture, I wonder if we don't need to bring in, concepts of repression, violence, undemocratic processes, and maybe we focus very much today on neoliberalization, financialization, or I have anyway, but I think also, it's a big topic today when you look upon what is happening in our field. And I'm very curious how we will interpret this period of neoliberalization in the future, because we have also so many kind of silent revolutions going on at the same time. We know that, very undemocratic, unsolidarian, forces are taking, they hold more and more power in how infrastructures are formed, how architecture is formed, how space is formed. I mean, think about the Danish policy in the former ghetto plan. Right. You demolish buildings in a period of climate crisis.
So architecture becomes ideological again, in a way, which it possibly hasn't been for a while.
And it's used in as a repressive tool in a political transformation. Right. So I think that the work on the welfare state will look very different I think if I would continue this project, I would shift questions, and focus very much.
Right. Yeah. Very good. Or it's kind of a pessimistic. You paint a pessimistic image of current conditions, but that also means that there's a lot of work to do going forward, and beyond the welfare state.
Yeah. And there, I think that through looking at architecture as being part of so many different agents and infrastructures like the code, corporatism, and so forth, you could also work through these channels, because it's through these channels, bureaucracy and so forth, that very much is happening. And I think it's important for architects to kind of take their place in these processes, and I also see a future there and some kind of hope, that you could open up things there. You could find gaps and kind of start to change and shift things, and that's also something you can do through your profession as an architect. So it's some kind of exclusiveness maybe you have as an architect there, and that's also what I would like to open up. With a book, you could say.
Thank you so much, Helena, for this conversation.
Thanks. You, Christina.
Great.
Wow.